Entirenet presents the Learning and Development Industry's Thought Leadership Interview Series with your host, yours truly, Mojo Tillett.
I'm really excited to sit down and talk to my friend Jonathan Halls. We have a lot of great conversations, usually over some good food, and it's nice to kind of formalize it and get something on tape. You and I talk about kind of the state of learning and where we've kind of were and where we're going. Can you kind of talk about what you're thinking along those lines?
Yeah, I think what we've got is we've got the shift from the industrial to the post-industrial world, which kind of sounds all academic. But if we think about the industrial world, so much of what we live, work and play and just our lifestyles are based on assumptions which came out of the industrial revolution.
Right.
And that impacts things like control and knowledge, predictability, certainty, all those sorts of things. And we're transitioning to a new world where really a lot of the things we took for granted can no longer be taken for granted. Now, I'm careful to say that not everything is changing. I think it's a load of crap, that old saying that the only constant is change. It's not. There's a lot of things that will never change.
Right.
For example, the human being's innate need for a story never changes.
Right.
How we tell that story will change, but the fact we need that, the fact human beings need relationships will never change. The fact that now some people get married after meeting somebody online rather than in person, the way they do those relationships has changed. So, we've got things that will never change. People need stories, people need other people and all that kind of stuff. But the way we meet those needs that never change is what's most significant. And the last big change we had was kind of like, it was the Industrial Revolution. And people went from living this lifestyle where their workplace was in the back shed with a blacksmith, and it went from that little world where dad taught son how to do something, and sometimes mum was involved in the business in some way, whether she had her own business doing sewing or whatever it was. But we went from that village kind of industry to this big factory world. And then in that big world, they invented the whole idea of the manager. Right. And the manager was in control. They told you what to do. The manager knew everything, because very often they were the people that had been to college, unlike the people who came in who are no longer making money as blacksmiths because the industry wasn't there. It was now in the factories. And the whole idea of a manager didn't exist before then.
Right.
So knowledge and power and control came out of that world. But now we're going through this world where a lot of that stuff is up for grabs. It's no longer quite so certain. And let me give you the whole idea of knowledge, for example. We value knowledge, but really in the old days, knowledge was in the head of the manager, the wise teacher, the father or whatever. We are in a knowledge economy where knowledge is growing and changing every single day, so that the knowledge that we have in 10 years' time is probably going to be exponentially greater than the knowledge we have today. Right. So if you go and do a college degree, 3 years after you leave, a lot of what you've learned is out of date.
Right.
And we've got these workplaces where the manager is somebody who's been in the game for 7 to 10 years, which means that if they've been a worker for 7 to 10 years, they're going to be 4 to 7 years out of date on the knowledge. But we live on these principles of the manager knows best, the manager should make the decisions. And this just does not work. It worked back then, but it doesn't work anymore.
Right.
And I think those major shifts are coming into the classroom. So that whole idea of, in fact, really as learning facilitators, we can't be the experts that we once wanted to be. And there's a certain sense of comfort in being an expert, there's a certain sense of pride in being an expert. No, as learning professionals, we should be professional learners. And really, our role is to help guide people.
Yeah.
What I think is fascinating about that is when you look at adult learning principles, you go back to Malcolm Knowles and people like that, they always said learning takes place on board the learner. They said it's about the experience the learner brings to the classroom that we can build knowledge. And I think in many ways, the world is catching up with some of those ideas. And it's funny, people poo-poo Knowles and they say, old-fashioned theory, and Carl Rogers, that great saying, I can't teach you anything, but I can help you learn.
Right.
And now I think we're starting to realise that we need to embrace some of these things. But that's part of the big shift that's taking place.
Yeah. I agree with you. What I would like to talk about now is how does this apply to learning and development professionals?
Well, I think obviously we're going to be in the world, we're in the world where this shift is taking place, but I think we need to go back and maybe embrace some of the adult learning principles, which I think were around predating the big conversations about the industrial to post-industrial shift. And that is, learning takes place on board the learner. It's up here in our learners. So let's not be fixated by the whole idea of perfect presentations, perfect instructional design. And I know that's controversial here, but making it absolutely perfect is just not realistic in a world that's constantly adjusting and changing.
Yeah.
So I think what I'd be thinking about is saying, well, if learning takes place on board the learner, really we should be reflecting on strategies that help them build the learning. And we know the latest neuroscience. It tells us that the learning doesn't take place on a PowerPoint slide. It's literally neurons firing in people's brains.
Right.
So learning becomes less of what am I telling people, what am I presenting, or as Carl Rogers challenged us back in 1950, I can't teach anybody. We need to stop saying what are we teaching people, and more about what experiences are we creating that are going to help people create that learning for themselves, and how can we create those experiences to shape the direction in which they're going, so that we're not teaching them stuff that's unethical, we're not teaching them stuff that's going to be dangerous, but at the same time giving them the lateral room to maneuver and create something that's meaningful in their head. So I think we need to radically change that. So I think we can learn from what's been going on in the media industry. And I remember when I was at the BBC in the late 1990s, early 20s, what we were talking to people about was the end of broadcast. I said, no, this is not going to happen. But broadcast was all about somebody sitting in a room and deciding what goes on what TV channel.
Right, programming.
Programming, yeah. So the role of the program director, whether it's TV or radio in any country of the world, was very much shaping what people get. And that's been thrown out because now you get anything you want on demand in any shape or format that you want. Now, people who are watching this video are going to say, oh yeah, tell us something new. But I want to really emphasize, this is fundamentally new because this didn't happen 10 years ago.
Right.
And the changes that are taking place so fast right now are making us forget how fundamental these changes are. And it's like growing up without the chance to grow up. And I think we need to explore what that means in the learning situation and understand that learning has to be totally different, and it has to be where the control is totally with the learner. How do we make that work? Because it's a difficult equation. Do we surrender all of it? Do we surrender part of that control? And I don't know the answer. I think it's stupid of me to suggest I do.
If you're putting the emphasis on the learner, right, is not some of our responsibility to help people learn how to learn a little bit? I mean, do we need to start talking about that? How do we make people or help people, coach people into being learners?
Well, I think that's the future. And yes, we will need some technical things, because if you've never flown a spaceship or performed heart surgery, we would hope that somebody demonstrates it to you first. You don't try it out in a learner experiment. But I think fundamentally at the school level, we should be teaching people. I say the word teaching carefully, because I don't mean teaching in the Carl Rogers sense, you can't teach anybody, but we should be creating those learner experiences where people are learning how to learn, and we should be helping them reflect on that and tapping into their motivation so it works for them. And that means understanding, and you know, little boys don't work well in classrooms. They don't learn. They need to be out grubbying themselves up, falling in the dirt.
That was my problem.
Yeah, there you go, absolutely. So, but like you say, we're controlling them into this class. Now, I understand there's another issue, and that is the reality of funds. And every county in this country is going to say, well, we don't have the money to invest in that. And I get that. That's always going to be the tension. But we need to acknowledge that so that we're not pretending it doesn't exist. But we're saying, well, we understand this, so maybe we need to think more creatively to get around that major block. But learning how to learn is a critical skill. It's not happening in corporations. And I see people come on some of my workshops, which are very open-ended, because I find that's what helps people learn. But you've got to structure and create the safety and the environment for that to happen. But people are very uncomfortable with that, because they want to come in and have it given to them. If they're given that, they're going to forget it. If they're given a situation where they have to build it in their head, they will remember it. And I think that's a fundamental transition we need to be kind of making. The bottom line is, it's a big, messy experience. And we're teaching new trainers that training is just a couple of tips and tricks. It's not. Learning is a messy experience. And it's messy in a very positive way, because everybody who comes through that door or comes online to a learning event is different, with different aspirations and different dreams. And we have to learn how we're going to help them meet that.